Oh, you organize it. Yes. Okay. What? Because my job has the doctor. No, no. What is it? See. Can you say something to your user? Okay, if you can send it now, okay, network will that. Please don't download video, man. Take a lot of time. But if you can send it now, you have a spare that drive. I have it. That one. Yeah. And still the laptop. How much you can have it? My laptop. Yeah. Uh, go ahead. Gbádùn dáǹsì àná. Mi wá gbà lọ. Ṣé o náà lè ń pè é nǹkan láti lè ní? Rárá. Torí mi ní onígbà òsínbẹ́ onígbà wà lọ́dún kí ló ṣe ní ẹgbẹ́ ìlọ sáyé. Oliver Cook. Kò wá lọ́dún kí ló ṣẹlẹ̀ fún mí sẹ́ẹ̀rì. Káyà ti lè lọ sáyé. Cambridge ló wà ìṣòro Cambridge. Pàdé ní orí tó bá. For me, you man watch and it's always like, very happy. There are some notable persons like Mr. Lucy, you know, editor, yeah, Kali, yeah, you know. I see, yeah, I need to one every, so to retire, do, it's a man, we know man, what that. Wọ́n á fẹ́ àdìsá mi. We have 5 more minutes. Okay. Okay. It's for you. You are sharing this one. Yeah. It's for you. You are sharing this. Please. Yeah. Good part of your husband. No, you mentioned it. Oh, go to check if they are online to receive. Yes, one of the presenters. I'm going to lower this so that we can ask her via slide. To the second presenter. Hi, Lisa. Can you hear us? Yes. Hello, can you hear us? You are muted. If you can hear us, can you just unmute and let's try to see if your slide works.
To be able to share a slide, if she requests for to share a slide for either way, I can make
just like to try it first, but if she's not available, then do it later.
But we don't have any issue, like so you see our presence.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
An extra charging support for you. You better charge phone, not lock on. Ṣé kò sí kan tó ń ṣe kí n bẹ? Type C ni mo need. Or do you have the type C that is available? Okay.
So this thing. You get the passport.
Yes, I think that will. I think that will. I'm going to go ahead and look it up. But when I come there, it's a present.
All right, sir. Thank you.
Hi, Vera. We are here. Hope you can hear us. All right, pretty much. Okay. Oh yeah, she's there.
Yes, we can. I can.
Yes. Hi. Hi.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. Yeah. Do you want to try and share your slide and see if I guess it should work, but
Are you talking to me?
yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. No, I don't have any slides for the presentation.
Okay, that's fine.
Yes, I'm thinking, is that okay? Also, my name is spelled wrong, and I'm not an independent scholar as well. Sorry. I emailed beforehand. I don't know if it got lost in the junk.
Sorry about that.
What institution?
It's okay.
What's your institution? Sorry.
The University of Cambridge.
Oh, sorry. Yes, of course.
We have you in the intro. We have it right.
Yes.
So Daniel is going to introduce you correctly, but so sorry for that.
It's okay.
How do you spell your name, please, so that we can correct that?
It's literally, instead of an E at the end, it's an A. So Kesena instead of E.
Kesena, right?
Okay.
Kesiana. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry about that. Yeah, we're good.
It's okay. It's okay.
No, you can see there. You can see. Yeah. All right.
Please, if you have a PowerPoint, please make attempt to share it for us to see if you can do that. If you can, then let me see how I can help from here.
Sorry, was that for me? You want me to test my
Yes.
my slides?
Yes. Yeah, Lisa, if you have, just try. Just request.
Okay, I'll send a
yes,
request.
yes, exactly. Then you
Got
have it. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Okay. All right. Okay. So, welcome to the final session on this particular wonderful session on public history and critical museology. For this third session, we would have 4 different presentations. The very first one will be by Cassiana. I hope I pronounced the name well. Cassiana Charlotte Barry from the University of Cambridge. Cassiana is an artist and art historian pursuing a master's of studies in the history of art and visual culture at the University of Cambridge. The title of the presentation is World Trophies or Shared Histories, Decolonization, Reparations, and the Politics of the Museum Display. All right, you have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So I'm going to read out a piece, and I hope I hope everything's okay. So a museum is a place of culture, knowledge, and beauty. Most importantly, it's a place where history comes alive, a place that celebrates our past in glory, a place for artifacts and artworks to call home and be experienced, a place that connects us with our ancestors. The museum is also complex, and the role of the curator and the museum director is a tough one. Every aspect from the museum, from the interior and the exterior, the layout, the objects, the history of the institution, the display, its location, everything from the grand facade to the building where the artifacts and artworks are positioned, unconsciously or consciously affect us. Museums lead us to judge what aspects of history we should have a rich knowledge of and which we shouldn't. When we meet these grand museum displays, what do we expect? Especially to myself as a woman of mixed Nigerian and English heritage, this question is amplified. We expect Nigerian and other indigenous artifacts and artworks to be full of the same sense of glory, knowledge, and storytelling that English and Western artifacts have. Yet this seems not to be the case. A discussion that shows the significance of the museum in our society is a discussion of reparations, decolonialization, and the acquirement of looted artifacts and artworks. In this discussion, we will focus on the theft of the Benin bronzes, the pillaging of Benin, and decolonization. I believe that in the West, we struggle to discuss and shed light on our dark past. However, without this discussion, it will be hard to reconcile, educate, and move forward in a more nuanced, inclusive, and self-aware manner. By leaving out this discussion, it warps society's beliefs of history. We must remember that many of the objects displayed in museums are loot, the remains of cultures, histories, societies, and even of eradicated races. Jeffrey Robertson explains that the trustees of the British Museum have become the world's largest receiver of stolen property, and the great majority of their loot is not on display. With this, museums dangerously tread the line between glorified war trophies and places of intellectual research and study. Some scholars and academics believe that the museum is a glorification of our colonial past, like Sahid Varda described in her paper. Others believe that decolonization should not occur, as the National Army Museum Director expressed when talking about his latest upcoming exhibition, that there is no need to decolonization to happen here. I don't think we should be ashamed of any of our British history. I say, is it really that black and white? My aim is to shed light on how important the Benin bronzes are to Nigeria, but also how important they are to Britain too. How can the Benin bronzes and the Nigeria displays be exhibited with respect? With the colonization of museums becoming such a great movement, how can we keep that momentum and become aware of how museums shape our beliefs of history? This is where intermediality becomes important. The term intermediality describes artworks that use many or a combination of mediums and techniques to create one piece. In this discussion, I'm applying this term to museums as the best way to understand that mechanism and the effects of the museum on the society. In all cases, the museum is just as important as the object itself. It displays the value, how much attention we should give these objects, and where we should place them within history. What does it mean when we display different artifacts and artworks with different stories that come from different regions in such a grandiose building? Looking at the museum through the lens of intermediality, we can see that the museum can end up rewriting and obscuring the history of artifacts, whether intentionally or not. The Benin bronzes are significant objects and hold so much power to the people of Nigeria and the African diaspora. These objects signify a part of Nigeria's rich culture, spirituality, and ancient history. The collection of artworks and artifacts made up of brass plaques, ivory carvings, wooden sculptures, spears, beads, and even human remains stands as reminders of a horrific siege and the remnants of a lost history. The reasons the bronzes are subject to many conversations, debates, and academic research is because of their theft, because of the way they are exhibited and how far away from home they are. Also, the refusal to take them back home and the refusal to truly acknowledge their history. An example of a moment where museums struggled with reparations was when Nigeria asked for the Royal Mask to be returned for the Festival of Arts and Culture in 1977. The British Museum met them with no response. It's a shame how the history of the bronzes is somehow excused and how the museum finds it hard to face their dark colonial past. There seems to be a gap in our knowledge on how to display these objects thoughtfully and with nuance, a gap in the way that we acknowledge their colonial past and the ways in which these objects and its displays were used as colonial propaganda tools. As written on the B&A Benin Bronze's descriptions, the British press sought to justify this brutality by depicting the Oba, the king, and his people as savages who practice human sacrifice. This is a shocking example of British propaganda used to cover up the disgrace of the expedition. These objects were sent across Europe to spread colonialist ideologies, to show how barbaric Africans were and how it was just for Africans to be stripped of their beliefs and livelihoods, art, and their resources. We can see this venom in the dispatch from the consul, General Moore, to the Marquis of Salisbury, where he states, "It is imperative that a most severe lesson be given to the kings, chiefs, and juju men of all surrounding countries, and that white men cannot be killed without impunity." Amongst all this intensity, it is not made clear that museums carry the history of deeply complex and horrific battles and politics. The Benin bronzes were collected as loot during the Benin punitive expedition. This expedition was a supposed revenge over the murder of British missionaries on a friendly mission to Benin, a mission to encourage a monopoly trade route for palm oil and other resources between Britain and Benin. The Oba rejected the deal, and as a result, the missionaries were murdered, with only 2 surviving. This left Britain with no other choice than to seek revenge, but it was also the opportunity to loot the great wealth of ivory from the Oba. Benin at the time was an extremely powerful nation, rich with resources, and had an extremely close trade links with other countries. The Benin people had a close relationship with the Portuguese, trading materials and goods during the 16th century. Captain Lorenzo Pinto, a Portuguese captain, expressed when he arrived in Benin in 1647, "Great Benin, where the king resides, is larger than Lisbon. All the streets run straight for as far as the eye can see. The houses are large, especially that of the king, which is richly decorated and has fine columns. The city is wealthy and industrious. It is so well governed that theft is unknown, and the people live in such security that they have no doors." In the bronzes, we can see depictions of the Portuguese people and their relationships with the Benin people, and how strong and influential it was for both communities. This shows that the Benin expedition was clearly not an act of revenge. The vast collection of art, artifacts, and objects that we call the Beni bronzes are made up of many bronze plaques, reliefs, ivories, and sculptures, created using an ancient technique known as the lost wax process that was born in West Africa and traveled throughout its many regions. This extremely technical skill was passed down through families of artsmen and craftsmen and involved creating a clay model that was then coated with beeswax with the final form carefully etched into the model to then be cast in brass or bronze. A technique so beautiful and fine that initial reactions to the bronzes were that there must have been a Portuguese influence, as the techniques used were deeply technical and full of artistry. As discussed in an article by Tim Butcher called "The Problem with the Beni Bronzes Will Never Go Away," Phillips records the arts establishment dodged refusals to accept the Beni bronzes were even African. Racial hierarchy meant that they surely had been brought to Africa from elsewhere, Portugal, perhaps, or India. This shows how ingrained colonialist thought was throughout the West, and the way in which these artworks and artifacts were eulogized, fetishized, and displayed and paraded around exhibitions to encourage the same colonial sentiments. The future of these objects, destined to be exhibited and fetishized, to wonder how such a barbaric culture could create such beauty. When the bronzes arrived on the British shores, museums and institutions took a particular interest in the collection, as explained by Annie E. Combs in her paper Ethnography, Popular Culture, and Institutional Power. When speaking about the British Museum's desire for the bronzes, the ethnographic department was able to capitalize on the visibility of the Beni bronzes in the public domain as both evidence of barbaric savagery and artistic anomaly, in order to claim that their retention was a matter of national urgency. The British Museum, the Pitts Rivers, the Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology in Cambridge, just to name a few, took a strong liking to the bronzes, with 300 of the many plaques gifted to the British Museum. These exhibits were such a success that the first exhibit held at the British Museum in 1897 was described as intrigued and perplexed that work of such technical expertise and naturalism has been found in such quantities in Africa. The national, local, scientific, and middle-class illustrated press all postulated hypotheses to explain the paradox. Many of the looted objects journeyed across Europe and America, taking part in exhibits that created a place for European audience to safely oogle and contemplate on how such beauty could come out of such a barbaric and uncivilized culture. The number of objects stolen from Benin is unknown. There have been many attempts to catalogue these pieces, which has been unsuccessful, as many are still in private collections, homes, or lost archives, unable to be accounted for. According to the art newspaper, when they discussed the digital Benin catalogue that is shining a light on more than 5,000 looted objects housed more than 100 museums worldwide, also according to Mike Wells, an update it is thought that more than 2,000 bronzes are in private hands. This means that there are trophy pieces of the Benin expedition scattered all around the Western world, their meaning now replaced and now stand as a figure of power of colonial Britain. Thousands of objects unable to be traced, unable to be returned, or even studied or respected in their rightful manner. Museums are complex, and they are full of complex histories, politics, and identities. And today they face an issue. How can museums truly acknowledge and be held accountable for their colonial history and wrongdoing? This reveals the systematic nature of the destruction of this ancient site.
Yeah.
Sorry, am I?
Yes, keep going, please.
Are you back?
Yes,
Daniel?
we are back. Yes, we are back. We had a little, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay,
Christina, you can.
Sorry. Thank you. Sorry. Egerton's list reveals that the systematic nature of the destruction of this ancient site for days after the city was initially taken. The transformation of a living sacred site and royal palace into an archaeological site. We have to remember that the effects of colonialism simply do not wash away whether or not the objects are returned, that the museum highlights and almost glorifies its colonial history, subconsciously or consciously, whether that is through showcasing sacrilegious exhibits, burying these artifacts deep within the archive, or most importantly, not giving these collections thorough and nuanced context. In this point of time where there is such a cultural divide within history, politics, and society, these institutions have to be the leaders of this conversation. They must try to generate. Museums are faced with a difficult task of battling against modern day perceptions as well as their own colonial and imperial past. The ways in which the bronzes and other looted artifacts are displayed and exhibited shape our narrative of history, especially within the walls and context of the museum. The white space and the colonial architecture motifs that surround and engulf these artifacts and engulf these colonial artifacts play into our perceptions and the ways in which we should contextualize and think about the objects. Its display manipulates people's belief, the meaning and understanding of artifacts or the artworks in the history. This is explained by Stephanie Moser in her paper, The Devil in the Detail. While within the field of museum studies, there is wide recognition of the important role museums play in communicating ideas, there is a general lack of awareness in other fields about the extent to which exhibitions create knowledge about the subjects they seek to represent. How the artifacts or artworks are displayed, its location, the lighting, the objects that surround the piece, these factors shape our knowledge of history and also how significant we consider or believe the object to be. In conclusion, museums and the people that work within them have a challenging task. Working with an institution with a history so deep and complex, most importantly, the matter of decolonization spotlights how important intermediality is to the core of the museum. Everything within the museum, from the architecture, with the way it interacts with the location, the interior, its layout, and the location of exhibits, affect us. The traits of this museum influence and affect our perception of history and the objects that the museum call home. How have these traits of the museum influenced and warped how we expect historical artworks to be handled, displayed, and spoken about? In the case of the Beni bronzes, the objects that make up the collection were and still are extremely significant artworks and artifacts. They were objects and artworks that were used daily. Others were kept away until significant religious days. They were touched, tactile objects, a part of a community. And when we view them in a museum display case, can we understand the history? When we remove the objects from their home environment and change their display and their use, what do they now become? What do we believe they become? This is why the discussion surrounding the bronzes and other looted artifacts is so significant. It is simply not about their theft, but how they've been handled by the museum, what archive they've become lost in, what box they've been squeezed into, or which wall they've been mounted on. It is about the mistreatment of these objects, the ways in which they arrived in the museum, how the museum displays them, and the history of the museum and the objects themselves. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for your presentation. So we'll take the questions after all the presenters have presented. Now, the next presenter would be presenting on the topic Otra Area Mesmo Ma 1. That's sacred object of West Africa and its Brazilian diasporas in UK Museum by Louisa Kaman from, we are gone off, okay. All right. Okay, so Louisa is a Chase, all right. So Louisa is a Chase doctoral researcher at SOAS engage in mapping the biographies of Afro-Brazilian objects in the UK museums. All right. You have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just set up the audio, otherwise things won't work properly when I share the sound. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Perfect.
1 second. 1 second. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. It's a pleasure to be a part of this panel. And this is a really valuable chance for me to test out a particular angle in my doctoral research and get insights from people working in the continent. Since so far, my analysis has been mostly focused on the UK, where my objects of study are located, and the Brazilian state of Bahia in the Northeast, where they are originally from. 3 observations before I get into the subject properly. First is that I changed the title, as you can see, to remove the use of the word sacred, because my fieldwork has been complicating this notion, as different objects are considered to hold or channel sacred energy to different extents by different groups and people. Secondly, please note that what I'll share today is but a glimpse of a vast musical universe, so to try and mitigate that, I'll share a playlist link later. And third, this presentation will include some quotations from 19th century containing racist language, so I'll provide a verbal trigger warning. And then there will be a box on the top right over there on the slides in question. So I'll start by explaining the title of my presentation, Outra areia mesmo mar, which literally translates to different sands, the same ocean, poetically expressing how the diasporic experience is marked at the same time by difference and commonalities between those on the different shores of the Atlantic. The phrase is drawn from the song composed by the samba school Viradouro. They're from Rio de Janeiro. And in 2024, the Carnival Parade saluted the Vodun Dambé, worshipped in Brazil as the Orixá Oxumaré. I have prepared an excerpt of the song, and this is where you need to let me know if the audio is coming through clearly. 1 second. Can you hear that all right? No?
No, it's not too clear.
Give me 1 minute. Sorry. I tested this before and managed to make it work, so I am confident I will again. Oh, that's a shame. Sorry, 1 minute.
Yes. Can leave it.
Okay, I might have to share the song later. I managed to do this before. It's just not giving me the same option. That's a real shame. But anyway, maybe we can just highlight the lyrics for now, and then I'll share the playlist later on. As you can see, it reads, an ocean has been bled for your right to incorporate in a more African Brazil, another sand, the same sea. I chose this phrase to highlight one of my key points, which is that music has and continues to offer a space for the celebration of Brazil's African heritage. And that has managed to resist not only the colonial system, but their enduring and ongoing internalized project that has sought to erase traces of African culture from Brazil's history and society, despite it being one of the world's largest African diasporas. Taking this as a starting point, I will analyze the spoliation of musical instruments from the diaspora as part of a larger panorama of appropriation. So let me contextualize the spoliation, which is the subject of my PhD. I investigate a collection assembled by British Vice Consul James Wetherell in Bahia, highlighted there in red on the map, between the years of 1842 and 1857 when he was in Salvador, a key transatlantic hub and still the city with the largest Black population outside of the African continent. Wetherell collected what he described as objects of vegetable origin and sent them to William Jackson Hooker, director of the Royal Botanical Gardens in Kew, England. As expressed in his frequent correspondences with Hooker, it was Wetherell's intention to contribute to the Museum of Economic Botany, an institution aimed at demonstrating the processes by which plants could be transformed into objects of use and value for potential investors in plantations in colonial territories. Hooker enlisted the help of amateur botanists that had close links to the UK's imperial and diplomatic affairs all over the globe. Wetherell was one of them. After years of sharing observations, sketches, and plant specimens from Brazil with Kew, Hooker sent his first box of objects in 1852, including a variety of items, which I won't have the time to go into now. But the following year, he sent another box, this time containing a belt allegedly woven on the coast of Africa, carvings of cedar wood, tobacco snuff, a reel of cotton thread, and the two musical instruments on which I will focus today. Wetherell listed the provenance of these items as sometimes made in Bahia and at other times made in West Africa, or specifically made by Yoruba in Nigeria and used in Bahia. He doesn't name a single individual, instead referring to people in terms of racial types. Now, this is the trigger warning for the next two slides. I will refer to these objects by their names as they're still known: shekere on the left, sometimes called agbe or jashere, and berimbau. I have been unable to see either of them in person because the shekere was under quarantine due to a pest outbreak in the Kew stores. And the British Museum, who acquired part of Kew's collection when the museum closed in the 1960s, has been unable to locate the berimbau as of yet. I can identify it as such from this sketch in the BM's registry book. Despite the absence of names of the instruments and their makers, Wetherell did offer accurate descriptions of how they were played in his letters as well as in his diary. Wetherell describes, quote unquote, extremely rude instruments and the practice of dancing and chanting that accompanied the playing. Wetherell uses terms like dull, rude, hollow, deafening, and noise to describe the sounds. His mention of the berimbau later in the book also uses the term monotonous. These judgments, of course, reveal more about the limitations of his perception than about the practices themselves, exemplifying the European mindset of the time, which considered music to be only its own practices, removing the sounds of others from the flow of history that Europe preserves for itself and its narrative of civilization, progress. Wetherell is no different than the other white people of Bahia who complained about the sounds of drums, calling them quote unquote barbaric or rude, and repressing the practices that involved them. This is the case of capoeira, a combination of dance, music, and martial arts that was outlawed in Brazil. This is the end of the trigger warning, by the way. That was outlawed in Brazil from the colonial era until 1960, and at times just carrying a berimbau was grounds for an arrest. Since colonial times, the singing of capoeira has been used to describe the trauma of enslavement and themes of resistance and freedom. This is where I intended to show you. I can still probably show you the clip. It will just be muted of how capoeira is, we call it played, danced. And I was going to show you an audio clip as well, but I'll just share that later on. And as you can see in the lyrics, capoeira articulates themes of liberation, and the berimbau is a key part of that. I should also say that capoeira is now listed as cultural heritage and is still practiced in Brazil and all over the world. I'm just going to leave the clip playing till the end because what he's about to do is very impressive. And then we'll move on to the next slide. There you go. There you go. Now, onto the shekere. This instrument is more directly linked to the music played in Afro-Brazilian religions for the worship of orixás, voduns, and inquisis. It is used to play a rhythm called Ijexá for the orixá Oxum and also for other deities. For this reason, two of my research participants, Iraildes of Ileaxé Opoafonjá and Vovó Sissi of Ileaxé Opoaganju, have stated that the shekere is a sacred object to the extent that it channels sacred energy. But shekeres have also made it far beyond the realm of candomblé. There are reports dating from the 19th century of the so-called barbers' bands, made up of Black professionals enslaved or freed, who, yes, cut hair, but also performed small surgical interventions and played in musical groups. Nowadays, shekere is part of a wide range of other rhythms of Afro-Brazilian origin, including maracatu, from the state of Pernambuco, and different forms of samba played widely all over the country. I was again going to show you a clip of me learning to play. I'll just play it even with the sound, so you can see how it's played. And then I was demonstrating different rhythms. So this first one is Ijexá, up, down, and side to side. Later on, this faster one is maracatu. And then the last one, which is even faster and with smaller movements, is samba, but it won't translate without the audio. I'll just share it later. Now that I'll move on to my key argument, which is that the lives of worship, movement, and sung histories of joy and resistance that these objects were made to live are in sharp contrast with the museological storage limbos and silence they currently experience in UK museums, as neither of them have ever been on display. As Yuri Passos and Angela Luning argue, drums of various kinds, shekeres and berimbaus, are part of the everyday recreative and ritual lives of Africans and their descendants in Brazil. They express the visual and sound aesthetics of these people and connect to other material and immaterial cultural memories and techniques. The lyrics accompanying the playing criticize the limited narratives of mainstream historiography, highlight heroes of the struggle against racism, praise the orixás, and tell their myths. As these instruments are often made from organic materials such as wood, calabashes, and leather, they often don't survive the test of time and have also struggled to survive violent repression, because the police would go into candomblé houses and literally smash objects or loot them. This reinforces the importance of items like the ones spoliated by Weatherall to Kew and the urgency of a present museological effort, both in the UK and in Brazil, to shed light on the narratives they contain. The absence of material culture from Afro-Brazilian peoples was a project carried out violently by the Portuguese crown, the Brazilian state, and the imperialist commercial enterprises that have preyed on Brazil over centuries, of which the UK is a leading part. The objects these groups now miss are part of attempts at maintaining and re-elaborating ancestral forms of knowledge, values, techniques, and practices used to guarantee the survival of diasporic people in Brazil. The memory that is preserved through music is hugely important, but kept limited to the space of popular culture and hardly ever integrated into spaces where culture is legitimized as a national hegemonic narrative, spaces like the museum. It is thus imperative that exhibition spaces be mobilized to tell these stories, to stop the perpetuation of violence by omission and silencing. Currently, I'm on fieldwork in Brazil, in Bahia right now, actually, to try and elucidate the context of these instruments and other objects collected by Weatherall. I'll leave you with this slide, which hints at some of the connections I have been making during fieldwork and hopefully inspire some feedback about strategies to think through these objects and more dignified futures for them. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for your presentation. We'll be taking the third presenter, Constanza.
Yes.
Pelilo. The title of her work is Reframing the Now in Turin, Identity, Belonging, and Decolonizing Discourses in the Museum. Egizio.
Yeah, it's
All right.
Egyptian.
Okay, all right, okay. So Constanza is a PhD candidate in Italian Studies at New York University. Thank you very much. You can
Thank you very much. I hope can you hear me just fine, both in the room and online? Okay, I don't know if the room is quite big, so I don't know if you can hear me. Yes, it's too big.
Minimize.
You should,
minimize.
yeah, you should zoom it out.
Minimize. Minus, yes. Yes, yes.
It's way too big. Okay.
It's fine.
Not yet.
Okay.
Can you put it on presenters mode, like full
Put it
screen?
on present. Yeah, down.
Okay, so while we'll set up the presentation, for once we are not going to talk about the Brits, but brace yourself because it's not going to be any better, I promise. Okay, so first of all, let me thank you all for being here in this room, and especially the organizer for giving me this opportunity to be in here in Lagos. It's been an amazing experience, a very challenging and stimulating intellectual experience, and really welcoming, even for someone like me who's not at all a scholar of African studies. I am, in fact, an art historian. I work on Italian heritage and media studies. And so what you're going to hear, it's quite out of the radar in a way. But I really hope this can, it's really opening up new paths for me that I hope I will follow after these very challenging and intense days. So over the past few years, my work has been guided by one main question. And this question is, in the context of mass migration and mass tourism, two forces that have profoundly reshaped the demographic and cultural landscape of Europe, for whom are we preserving Italy's artistic heritage, most of which is publicly owned? Are monuments and museums just tourist destinations? And if this vast and intricate fabric of artifacts and structure must be preserved because it holds value for its communities, our local and national institutions addressing the needs of those communities, whose cultural and ethnic makeup have changed dramatically in less than 2 decades. To me, the answers to these questions are inherently political. They deal with how we value the past, how we understand the complexity and sometimes the conflicts of our present, and what kind of society we wish to shape for the future. So next slide, please. So to explore this question that ultimately leads us into the politics of memory and identity, I will discuss one specific case, the Egyptian Museum, Museo Egizio. You'll see I will switch between Italian and English for the name of the museum, in Torino, northern Italy, that with over 40,000 objects in its collection, it's the world's second largest museum of ancient Egyptian artifacts, second only to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. So since its reopening in 2014 under the leadership of the director Cristian Greco, the Museo Egizio has positioned itself at the forefront of innovation, not only in exhibition design and research, but also in its public outreach initiatives, asserting its relevance within the global landscape of archaeological institutions. And that's why I got interested in the museum. I thought it was amazing. Yet the museum position is deeply ambivalent. While it has embraced an outward-facing, socially engaged role, it has not addressed the colonial and para-colonial foundation of its own collection. The contradiction between progressive outreach and unchallenged historical narratives makes the Museo Egizio a powerful site of investigation on how heritage is mobilized, contested, and politicized in a European context marked by demographic transformation and rising cultural polarization. Next slide, please. There's going to be a lot of slides, sorry. So unlike the majority of Italian museums, which are centered around classical antiquity or Renaissance art and are deeply rooted in the local artistic production, and thus mobilized to reinforce both local and national identity narratives, the Museo Egizio collection is entirely non-Italian in its origin. And I put a slide of Torino just to prove you that we're definitely not in Egypt here. And it's also a city that has that doesn't have the, it's not like worldwide renowned as many other Italian cities. Yet in over two centuries, the museum has become a cornerstone of Turin's civic identity and a key symbol of the Italian cultural prestige. Next slide, please. So I will briefly outline how the establishment of such collection and its inherently political value, because the museum was founded in 1824 as part of a broader European fascination with Egypt that followed the Napoleonic campaigns. Its creation in Turin, a city that had no prior commercial or political ties to Egypt, but was very close to France, reflected a deliberate effort by the local ruling House of Savoy to elevate the cultural status through the acquisition of prestigious antiquities, basically. The ambition wasn't just material. Already in the 16th century, court historians from the court of Savoy, like Filiberto Pingone, had invented musical links to the Egyptian, between Egypt and Turin, just to claim some sort of like symbolic alignment between the Italian peripheral dynasty and the great magnificent civilization of Egypt. So the museum's founding collection came by a Piedmontese diplomat, so a diplomat originally from Torino, Bernardino Drovetti, who worked in Egypt, collected around 7,000 objects and tried to sell it to France, but France wasn't interested in it. Therefore, they switched it and suggested to the like smaller reign of Savoy, where the king Carlo Felice bought it in 1824. So basically, it was a political and cultural tool since the very inception. It was a way for the Savoy dynasty to project legitimacy, sophistication, both within the reign and abroad. So they were just trying to like look smarter and cooler. So next slide, please. From the start, the Museo Egizio was not just a scholarly institution, it was part of a broader strategy to construct a cultural identity for Turin. Actually, the museum was open to the public since its creation. So it's been open for 2 centuries to the public, reinforcing its civic role. After the Italian unification in 1861, the collection became state property. And it's a rare case of a non-Italian heritage museum integrated within the national cultural framework. And its uniqueness stood out, especially in a city like Turin that, again, was the capital of the Kingdom of Italy since the very beginning, but it didn't have iconic monuments such as Rome or Florence. Next slide, please. So the Museo Egizio had become a powerful symbol of local pride, with its identity deeply woven into the fabric of Turin. This connection has been passed down through generations, especially by bringing children into the museum. So today, nearly 100,000 students take part every year into guided tours and workshops, and elementary school children particularly make up more than 10% of the total audience of the museum, making like early museum visit really a formative civic ritual for many people who grow up in Torino, which is the Italian version of the name. But if the museum visits are a civic ritual, we must ask, who are these children in Torino today? Over the past 2 decades, the city demographics has shifted dramatically. And today, around 15% of Turin's population holds non-Italian citizenship, with an even higher percentage in younger age groups. This means that a significant share of the students growing up going to the Egyptian Museum have a different cultural and linguistic background. And the museum has a very well-developed educational department, but notably, it lacks a dedicated cultural mediation team. And mediation efforts have largely relied on archaeologists who have taken on this role informally without proper education or specialist training. Next slide, please. I will give you just, you can see the total, but the city's population total, it's around 1 million. So the foreign citizens are around 15% of it, and again, I'm sorry I didn't have the time to translate it into English, but in terms of like non-European population, which constitutes the majority of it, we have a large group of people from Northern Africa, but specifically from Morocco, and another interesting percentage of people from Egypt and Nigeria actually has a big community in Torino. The next slide, please. Another data that we have to keep in mind when we talk about, when we discuss the case study that I will discuss in a minute, is the Muslim presence in the city. As you can see, we're talking about estimated data because there's no official record of it. So we're talking about like really spanning measurement. But we have these three numbers that we have to keep in mind. So Muslim presence in the city rounds up to 40,000 people, individuals. Muslim within Italian citizenship make around 20,000 individuals, and Arabic-speaking individuals, which cannot be overlapped, of course, make up for around 30,000 individuals. So the numbers are significant when we consider that the Museo Egizio civic role and cultural origin of its collection, and they reflect the presence of a diasporic community, many diasporic communities with direct and indirect connection to this heritage. And these communities have largely remained unacknowledged by the museum, even though in recent years there have been attempted to change this path. Next slide, please. So there have been a series of initiatives that were intended to promote and foster inclusion. Next slide, please. Most notably, the one in collaboration with the NGO Mondi in Città to develop a project called My Egyptian Museum that was involving North African women that were trained to give guided tour. Next slide, please. And this initiative successfully created the sense of belonging and familiarity with the museum among participants who often had never entered such spaces. But it's still devoted, this type of initiatives were only devoted to a very limited amount of participants. Just to give you a sense of what I'm talking about, so the museum has an average amount of visitors per year of 1 million people. This type of initiative reached out to around 100 people. So just to give you a sense of what we're talking about. So the lack of structural investment in inclusive practices has made the museum politically vulnerable, especially in the face of public attacks from right-wing politicians. Next slide, please. And one particular case reveals both the potential, the next one. This case, it's really telling in terms of what it means when a museum attempts to become inclusive, but doesn't have a structure to do that. Next slide again. So between 2016 and 2017, the Museo Egizio launched the public outreach campaign aimed at engaging Arabic-speaking residents of the Turin metropolitan area. Posters, only written in Arabic, appeared on buses and benches, featuring a smiling couple and a woman wearing a hijab. The campaign was titled "Lucky Those Who Can Speak Arabic," so Fortunato chi parla arabo in Italian, and the goal was clear: engage Arabic-speaking residents in a city where many feel excluded from cultural institutions. But what began as a gesture of inclusion quickly turned into a political firestorm. Next slide, please. The initiative got a positive, was widely praised by several media outlets because it was addressed to what we call, what they often call new Italians, so Italians with different cultural backgrounds. Next slide, please. But the first wave of backlash came almost instantly. So Matteo Salvini, who was the leader of the far-right party Lega, at the time not governing, seized on the campaign as an instant marketing stunt, framing it as diverse discrimination against Italian. I'm very sorry, you're gonna look at very awful stuff here, but that's the truth of the reaction to the campaign. Next slide, please. His message spread very rapidly on social media, igniting outrage from people across the country, many of whom had never visited the museum. The accusation ranged from Islamization to racism against Italian, entirely distorting the campaign's intent. Next slide, please. And again, by 2018, as national election approached, the attacks escalated. So it was over. It was a 2-month campaign, but every 2 years they came back to it. Next slide, please. The act resurfaced in the Lega populist propaganda, so the right party propaganda, with calls for resignation of the museum director, Cristian Greco. Next slide. And then came a defining moment. Giorgia Meloni, at the time head of a fringe far-right party called Fratelli d'Italia, staged a flash mob protest. I want you to pay close attention to this picture because the woman that at the time got 3% in the national election, it's now the Prime Minister of Italy. Okay, next slide, please. Holding signs warning against Islamization, Meloni exploited the widespread confusion between Arab identity, Muslim faith, and ancient Egyptian heritage. A conflation that was inaccurate as it was politically useful. This moment really matters because it marked the transformation of an inclusive yet local culture initiative into a national controversy, and of a museum director into a political target. And it showed how vulnerable public institutions can be when they step into the terrain of diversity without structural safeguards. Next slide, please. Even in 2023, 7 years later, after one court case that the right-wing party lost, yet continues to be weaponized. Once again, right-wing politician now leading the national government, the main Greco's, the director's resignation, accusing the museum of being, again, racist against Italians. What began as a campaign to welcome Arabic-speaking visitors is now a case study in how cultural inclusion can be manipulated into nationalist outrage when heritage is made to serve ideology instead of dialogue. Next slide, please. And I get to my conclusion. So the Museo Egizio is often praised for its openness and innovation, but this should be not mistaken for the colonial stance. While the museum has taken visible steps to engage broader audiences, it has yet to confront its structural legacy with colonial and paracolonial past, as I mentioned already. The absence of a cultural mediation department, the silence surrounding extraction-based archaeology, and the uncritical display of artifacts like the Temple of Elessia that was gifted by the Egyptian government in the 1970 for Italy's role in the UNESCO Nubian Monument Rescue. That was framed as cultural diplomacy, but in the end, it was a pattern of heritage extraction through masked as international cooperation. All of these points like show that this is still an institution shaped by Eurocentric narrative that still has to be challenged. So this case exposes the gap between symbolic inclusion and systemic transformation. Initiatives like the Arabic language campaign were meaningful, but without structural backing, they're just left the museum politically exposed and publicly misunderstood. So if we said decolonizing is not a metaphor, but it's definitely not an act of goodwill. And it demands tools, accountability, and institutional courage. And if museums like the Museo Egizio are to evolve beyond their original as monuments to European power, they must begin by acknowledging the legacies that built them and the communities that they have long overlooked. So the real challenge is not simply to diversify audiences, but to rethink the power structure embedded in the very foundation of this heritage institution, and to develop a structural, curatorial, pedagogical tools to interrogate their own authority. And this is a process that, truth to be told, in Italy still remains very, very absent, both in cultural institutions and in the public discourse, especially now in this polarized political climate marked by the rising of far-right nationalism and escalating racism. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for your presentation. So we'll take the last presenter, Abiodun Teller. Abiola Teller. She's an assistant lecturer at the University of Nigeria in Nsukka. Now, she studies indigenous knowledge system, and she'll be presenting on the topic from sacred object to artifact, wooden object, and the ethics of representation in museums. 15 minutes. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Abiola Okwemi-Fortela. I'll be speaking to the topic from sacred objects to artifacts, wooden objects, and the ethics of representation in museums. The next slide is a general overview of what I have. Then the next. As a means of introduction, wooden objects in many African cultures is more than just a medium, but a way of expressing culture and spirituality. They are both tangible and intangible aspects of culture. They are sacred, with spiritual significance, historical markers, and storehouse of cultural memory. They have deep symbolic meanings that are related to ancestry, identity, politics, and religion. However, once these objects are removed from their natural environment and displayed in museums, they take another form. They become artifacts.
So sorry to interrupt.
They become arts.
Abdullah, sorry to interrupt. We cannot see the slides because it's still on the first slide.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I'm still on the first slide. Yes, I'm still on the first slide. Okay, there. They are still seeing the title.
They are still seeing the title page. Okay.
Because you're not sharing it.
You are not sharing it, are you? No, you are not sharing it.
It's just like projecting.
Okay, so just hold on there. You are. Please, can you see the slides?
Now we don't see anything. Before we saw the slides, but we did not see them in full screen, not in presentation mode. We saw just the very first slide with all the other slides.
Okay. Is it better now? Can you see?
Now it's loading the presentation mode, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. It's a network. It's a network. Okay.
It's the network, yeah.
Yeah.
Saturday.
Yeah.
Okay. Now then just continue. We will wait for this. Don't worry. Thank you.
I said that once the subjects are removed from their natural environment and displayed in museums, especially those rooted in Western epistemologies, they undergo a profound transformation. They become artifacts or arts, depending on the term that they choose to be given. Then sometimes this reduces their meanings to aesthetics, materiality, or anthropological curiosity, instead of being valued primarily for their cultural or spiritual significance. This change from sacred objects to artifacts raises important ethical issues with regards to the collecting, conservation, display, and interpretation of wooden objects in institutional settings. Then the statements of problems. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So, is that it?
No, this is the aim.
Now the next slide.
No.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah,
please.
this should be the next slide. Thank you.
Okay.
So the statements of problem here, I have highlighted to loss of significance. Yes, wooden objects are treasured in African societies as they represent history. They symbolize culture and traditions, and they reminisce ancestral heritage. They are also emblems of political might, ritual practices, and markers of cultural identity. Despite all this significance or importance, once they are in the museum, they lose their significance and become mere museum objects. This transformation raises ethical issues concerning the display of wooden objects in museums. This paper therefore examines wooden objects in Obafemi Awolowo University Institute of Cultural Studies Museum. Next slide. The aim of which is to categorize the wooden objects and to interrogate the ethical processes surrounding the display and conservation of wooden objects. The method uses ethnography. Then the findings. First, go to the categorization. These objects were categorized using three 3 parameters: techniques of productions, objects exhibited at the museum, shows complex wood carving skills, indigenous wood carving skills that have been passed down through generations, one of which is the relief carving that has the art of incising designs on flat surfaces so the figures stand out clearly from the background. You're not there, please. Next. Okay, so that picture up there shows a relief carving. Then there's also the stylistic components. The range of styles represented in the museum showcases different ethnic groups and aesthetic philosophies. Some adhere to traditional Yoruba patterns, emphasizing symmetry and symbolism, while others display regional variations and syncretic influences. Then the functional use. The object displayed had a range of uses from domestic, they had mortars and pestles on display, to farming, hunting, and weapons such as hoes, cutlass, and guns. To religions, there's the Odo Shango or Shango mortar, Ere Beji, divination trays, and masks. By employing this classification, the study puts these objects not only as an artistic expression, but also within the framework of cultural context with specific meanings derived from real life experiences. Next slide. So the ethics of display and, ethics of display and representation, authorship and cultural identity. You may want to look at that picture again. That's a table. One challenge about authorship and cultural identity of museum objects is that they remove the ownership. Why I'm interested in this table is the day I went to the museum, they were having a seminar or a workshop to say. So some persons followed me to the museum. Then one person looked at the table and said, curator, where did you get this table from? He said it was donated by the past VC, Professor Roger Makonjiola. Then he said, oh, my boss carved this. He said, no, your boss did not carve this. He said it was carved by Lamidi Fakeye. He said, no, this is not Lamidi Fakeye style. This is Bamidele style. So I was looking at that and was like, okay, so what is the problem? So that is one of the problems we have with displaying objects in the museum. They take away the authorship. You don't even know who owns the object. You just put it there. And then people come, it becomes an argument. Then another thing is representation and colonial modernity. This can be explained from the perspective of repackaging the objects as ethnographic specimen with severe ties to their spiritual and epistemological foundations. If you look at the past pictures that have been in the previous slides, you'll find headdresses, masks, statues. All you see them say is, okay, like this one, for instance, the one to the left is headdress from Ilefe. That's the only thing that was put on the image, on the object, nothing else. No medium, no credit to the author, nothing. Then the second one is Odo Shango. Shango is the Yoruba god of thunder. So they said this is one of the tools used in his shrine. It was donated with nothing to tell us where it's from, who made it, or what it is used for. So all of this makes museum objects become ethnographic specimen rather than what they are meant to be. Then tools and ethical framework for display. Next slide, please. Yeah, collaborative curation. Local artists, elders, and academics should be involved in the curatorial process of museums because it is really messed up. When you get there, nothing is telling you what this object is about. You're left to, infer meanings into them yourself, which is actually not right. Then recontextualization. Attempts should be made at reestablishing artifacts in their historical, cultural, and ritual context. Then this decolonizing museums, we've heard a lot of decolonization today, so I don't know, I will not want to talk about that again. Then ethical conservation, the spiritual value of
wooden objects must be considered in preservation methods. Like I said, some of these objects have ritual significance, like the Odo Shogo, the Ere Beji, and all of those objects. They have ritual significance. They are consecrated and venerated. But once you put them into the museum, they've lost all of that. So there should be the need, a reawakening, although the creator claims that he used to give them what they require, but I don't know how far that is true. So, but there should be a reawakening to the spirituality involved in all of these objects. Then the next slide, please. Conclusion: the contextual, historical, and spiritual significance of wooden objects is rooted in African societies, and through their conversion into museum artifacts, it increased their visibility very well, but it also runs the risk of separating them from their epistemological foundation. This paper highlights the need for museum operations to adopt a more moral and culturally aware stance, one that affirms African heritage complexity and living presence rather than objectifying it by emphasizing African viewpoints and moral consideration in the selection and presentation of wooden artifacts. Museum can develop into places that promote cultural exchange, repatriation, respect, in addition to preservation. Thank you very much for listening.
All right. Okay, thank you so much. I think we still have almost about 20 minutes. So we will open the floors for questions. I don't know if we have any question online. But the floor is open. Vera and Tunde, do I have the permission to continue?
Yes, please.
All right. Okay. All right. Okay. So there's a hand up. Is it? Nobody. Okay. So please. Oh, okay. All right. So there's a hand up. Okay.
Right.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Well, thank you so much. I want to congratulate the for very beautiful presentation. Each on this one answer that.
Sorry, please. They can't hear you.
Okay. I don't have securities.
They can hear. Oh.
Both contributions and to seeking clarification. For instance, Tabela. Sometimes I was also wondering, the originality. Sorry to ask that representation, the originality of your work against the background of the old book. I'm sure you must have seen the book, Walter Benjamin, the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, where he had detailed in essence, that once a work of art, goes beyond, it's taken from its place, it loses aura, and then becomes like every other normal banner works of art. I think that would be a very good theoretical background for your work. And like you were saying, amongst, secondly, I went to YMC, I don't know if you know that museum at Pan-Atlantic University. I'm not in arts, I'm from the media, I come from mass command media. But I have some interest in art for aesthetic purposes. So I went to the MSC Nylon Museum, and then the original head of Shango, the one that were pouring libation on top, is in that museum, the biggest size in that MSC Nylon Museum. And the question I've asked myself, let me ask you, since the area of interrogation, when this work of art that one time venerated, and then we also appreciated that they have some spiritual prowess, when they are taken, like you say, dislocated from their original spiritual zone to other places, do they lose this spiritual link to the gods that they belong to, or were they just simple symbols that didn't connect to the gods? Did you ever add that in relation to your presentation and spirituality? So did they lose the spirituality, inherent powers of the spirit in them, or they just become all of a sudden, instead we take them out now, the spirits have been expelled out of them too? I want to have that response. Then my other question goes to Constanza, and I thank you also for a very beautiful presentation. That I happened to, landscape I know very well, I happened to have studied in Italy and Germany, and I also took interest in some arts. I remember I had a couple of tourism of the African arts in Italy. Like in Rome, there's the Museo della Civiltà, and then there's also Museo Missionari at Vaticana. Now, I'm asking, these dynamics that you encounter at Turin, using this as a escape, because the whole Muslim, Arab dynamics and Italian population is not located to Turin alone. The whole of Italy seems to be having that same challenge. Now, did that same dynamics this politicking of the arts, African arts there, does that also occur in other instances like Florence and Rome, or it's only peculiar to Italy? That's just what I want some clarification. Thank you.
Can we take 2 more questions? Any other? Okay. Yes. Yes, please.
So my question relates to the Sandra Korea.
Yes.
The legacy of the institution and parts.
All right. People here,
All right.
people online.
So the legacy of these Egyptian artifacts in Turin are to be, presented to the public without racism, right? Yeah, racism. Yeah. So I read that creepers offering discount to the Arabs by saying Pala Arabo that they are lucky to be Arabs is he's kind of sympathizing with the Arabs for the cultural heritage being lost abroad, right? So the question is, can museums such as Turin Egyptian Museum become a free racist hub? For example, if I'm to relate this to Nigeria, for example, if an artifact is to be brought from China to maybe Lagos Museum, would the people of Lagos feel that if maybe the curator is kind of racist towards this kind of thing, is it going to have the same effect, or is different in this kind of context? So the question will be about that. Hope you get the question.
Okay.
I have a question for Abiola. I was interested in how you were describing a desire to have an ethics of keeping in mind the spirituality of the objects. But then when you described your method of categorization, dividing it by style and functional, that felt very purposely ignoring what the objects actually were. And so could you speak more to how that method relates to your overall approach?
I think we'll take Vera, and Vera has a question.
Yes, thank you so much to all speakers for very intriguing presentations. I have a question actually for all of you. If you could, and it's a little bit of a provocative question, but I think since it's the final session of our 3 sessions today, it's perhaps an opportunity to speak about this. Could you say a little bit about the term museum from your different case studies? We looked now with you, following you at different case studies, different kinds of museums. But if you could say something about this term that we all use in different countries, which of course has a very Eurocentric, let's say, a background and also a colonial background, as we've discussed. And from your case studies, do you think that there could be alternative terms moving beyond the museum term? Thank you again so much to all of you. So this is directed to all of our speakers. Thank you.
All right. So who wants to go first? Our colleagues online, or we start from those? I think those online could start. Respond to the question, then we'll come in-house. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the term museum, I think it's something that is hidden in disguise, because I know in relating to Britain, the museum is something that is inherently colonial and was never born with this idea of educating people or research. It was born out of collecting colonial loot from across the British Empire. So I feel like the term the museum nowadays is incredibly misleading. And the way that we interact with the museum, and I would even stretch this to even go far as the gallery, is false. I know this is very pointed, but I really do think that we have to really reconsider the relationship that, especially in my research, what our relationship means with these institutions and how much power do they behold over us, and the way that we think and the way that we respect what is deemed as knowledgeable or intelligence and what isn't deemed as, knowledgeable and intelligence. And we see this with all of the artifacts that were spoken about today, how these objects and artifacts, how their history has been lost, has been eradicated due to being homed in the museum. I know this is really far-fetched, but I think in many sense of the museum, if we were really to go back and analyze it during its creation and its birth, it would be an institution that we would avoid and frown upon. It would not be something that we glorify and see as this bastion of intellectualism. I think it relates a lot to British exceptionalism as well. Like, this is a very colonial way of learning. And if we get rid of the museum and linking it to, as it's heavily related to this idea of education and the university system, we find different ways of learning as well as different ways of communicating history. So I feel like the term museum has to go, in a sense. I feel like it needs to be revised heavily and everything that comes with it. But yeah, thank you.
Shall I go next? I agree. I think has become a problematic term as well, and misleading, like you said. It's like a facade, and so is the discourse of preservation and universality. So museums signing the Universal Museum Declaration, but not actually trying to serve the people that have been complaining that the museum is failing them is a clear example of that. And then again, what is preservation if you are constantly telling biased, incomplete narratives? I think in terms of alternatives, and something I've been wondering in the field, when I arrived in Bahia, I thought, let me start trying to go to the terreiros or the candomblé worship houses where they have dedicated museums. Some call them museums and some call them memorials. Memorials is the term that is used more often. And I think that is the case because they're trying to put the emphasis on memory. However, these memorials are often focused on personalities that have been important to the terreiros. So past Mãe de Santo, Pai de Santo, Baba Lorixás, and so on, and Lorixás. And they are not a professor called Jair Martins de Miranda from Unirio. I was discussing this with him and he said, well, maybe you should consider the terreiro itself as what we used to call in the past eco museum. So a museum open to the outdoors as well, because the terreiros include a very vast green area where the plants for rituals are obtained. So he was suggesting that I see the whole space as a museum, and it is, because the objects that are most prized, they are not on display for the public. They are behind closed doors in the rooms devoted to each orixá, and you only see them like by candlelight in the midst of a ritual if you're allowed into the room. So I think it's interesting to consider also what should and should not be visible. I'm talking about objects that I think deserve more visibility with respect, but there's also things that are not available to all and maybe shouldn't be. That's what I'll say.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think I can give a single answer to all of the questions. So I bring in a very different stance compared to the last two presenters, because I understand that, like, looking at museums from, I don't know if they're there or not.
Oh, they're there.
Okay. Understand that, like, looking at the museum system from the British perspective means basically looking at at the model of the Universal Museum. I speak from a context, and I'll bring my Italianness in it, where museums have a very different dimension. They are widespread present in every corner. Like every little village almost has its own museum. So there's a direct connection between artistic production. It's not the museum. We're not born out of a separation between like the original collocation of a certain object, like a virgin to worship in the museum, but still there is a continuity. There is not this rupture that many universal museums embody. So in a way, museums are expression of local culture. And like the idea of destroying a museum would be like deleting, erasing a significant evolution of the local practice and cultural practice. So I don't think the Italian case aligns very well with many of these discourses. But on the other hand, this means that the colonial and the colonial heritage that Italian museums hold, and they do because of the colonial experience in Eastern Africa, because of other collections, like the case of the Egyptian, but there are some other collections in Rome, for example. There are more included in ethnographic museums. I feel like that museum professionals, they're not trained to deal with this type of heritage, because in Italy, when you say museum, you say art museum, you say Renaissance. That's what we think about, and there's no way around it. So I was trained in Italy for 10 years, and I've in art history, and I was interested in museum and stuff. But before going to the US, I probably never had a single class discussing anything but like Western art museums. So the problem, I feel, it's a lack of culture. In a way that it's also responding to your question. I feel like that avoiding certain racist stands comes from being aware of what you have and how you can be a cultural mediator. So I really believe in the cultural mediator function within a context that I know. I cannot extend this type of stance towards any museum. That's the first mistake when we talk about museum, as if it was one thing, all the same for everyone. That's very colonial of us to think of museum like this. Yes, just to clarify your point, so the other museums have been less exposed. Like they truly have colonial heritage, but they've been less debated in the public discourse. The problem with the Egyptian museum is that it's not technically a colonial museum, yet it's been very public facing, and it's become, despite the will of the director, a place where we discuss inclusion and so on and so forth.
Okay, so we'll take Abiola. We have about 5 minutes. So Abiola will go, and then we'll take.
I don't want to dwell much on the spirituality of
you have to come close.
wooden objects. I'll just say that once they are moved from there, why I'm saying this is I've actually heard the curators say they come keep objects from the shrine in the museum. So the next time it's going to be of use. So probably the spirit.
Like they move them from the shrine to the
yes,
and then take them back to the shrine.
Yes. One. I don't know. So, yes, but yes, it's this is something.
About the museum therefore serve as a conservatory.
Yes, conservation to help them safe keep it. They believe it is safer in the museum than in the shrines.
Native American community.
Okay.
So that is what I think happens, because if you need to.
But this, sorry, that we interacting with this pattern, does it replicate in the museum? Most of this is how.
I am speaking of what I know about. I don't know about any other museum. I'm speaking.
What goes on all the museums?
I don't know. It doesn't. I don't know if it goes around, but I'm strictly talking about Ile-Ife now. I'm not talking about it. So that is what I know. Then, considering this thing, I try to stay on the surface and not go into the spirituality of what they do. So be on the safe side.
Okay. And then the question about the museum, what's your whole idea about what museum is?
Well, for me, I think it is overrated.
Okay.
It is just it is just a building that has when the curator was introducing the museum to me, he said we have a large collection of wooden objects you really know anything about. So I am surprised. It is just a building, they keep this thing, they come, they clean and all of that. So that is
okay. Yeah, so yes, Castena.
Yes, sorry, just the rebuttal talking about thank you for all of your papers. It's made my head all whir, and I really love that. So thank you. But talking about the locality of museums, I know, for example, the Fitzwilliam, and throughout England, there are local museums. And I think the issue that we find with this idea of thinking about the museum is that the museum is the only way to look after these objects. It's the only way to validate research. It's the only way to validate education. Coming back and bringing the idea of the fact that all of these museums don't know what's being housed, what's in their archives. I think that lies the main issue is that what happens when we put these objects in a building? It completely discredits them, and I think that's why the museum needs to be destroyed and completely dismantled and rethought about, because the way that we think about artifacts in history relies on the institution of the museum and the way that the museum works. And I think that's a dangerous mindset to think about. As we've seen, my wider research talks about the death of the artist. Why is there no art movements? What's happened to the future of the art world? And I think it is these 1800s colonial structures, the museum, the university, and this only way of education, or banking, all of that economy allows us to only think that there's one way of doing things. And I think now that these systems are proving to be outdated, when we talk about the decolonizing the museum, the fact that of reparations, it shows that these systems and these institutions really do not work to the way that we reflect and think about history. But it boils down to the fact that we're too scared to change that and to stand up and to say that the museum doesn't benefit and it does more oppression than it does good. And it leaves nuance out of the conversation of history. Now, I know that's a very blanket statement and kind of very pointed, but I just wanted to ask what anyone else really thinks about that, and what benefits does the museum gives us, because I think that can boil down into the argument that we're experiencing now with the Benny Bronzes, that the museum will look after these objects better than anywhere else, which is a dangerous and poisonous kind of mindset. I don't know. I think I'm just thinking out there, but yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So, Tunde has final word. Okay. All right. So, okay. The time is almost up. All right. So quickly, 30 seconds. 30 seconds. All right. 30 seconds. Yeah.
Okay. I think I will stay here. I was going to throw the question I threw in the last panel, which of course question about the colonizing museum, which of course is mostly, debate in the global north, and we're talking about objects and the people mostly placed in the global south. For example, in the case of Benin Bronzes, a friend of mine was in Benin, a journalist from UK was in Benin, I think last year or so. I'm on the MOA project anyway, so he was on the project, and he came back to me. It was like, it seems the question of repatriation is not a big deal here, because I've been talking to a lot of people in the streets, and they're like, who cares? I want to eat, and most people don't even know what it is. But like you said, Casina, completely destroy the museum and dismantle it. How do we destroy the museum? How do we do that? Are we destroying the museum for the audience in the global north in the name of trying to decolonize? Or who are we really going to destroy the museum for? Is it the people in the global south who really, most of them don't really know what is going on? I mean, they do, some of them do care. Maybe the elites are the one asking for the repatriation, but quite majority of the people, I think there's a gap. There's a gap that still needs to be filled anyway. But the question is, how do we do that? Do we concern about the people really in the global south that we're talking about the colonization or the the question of decolonization will still remain in the global north and still remain within the academics. You know, I think it's more of academic rhetorics and movement and stuff rather than the practical thing. You know, so that's the general thing if anybody wants to respond. And to Viola? Okay. I was thinking about decolonization again, the context of, you know, in the local context, you know, when you talk about the way they caption the narrative on those objects in the museums in Africa. But, you know, these are the narratives put up by us, for us, on our own land, and we are still questioning it. So what do we do? I mean, is it a form of what do we call it? Is it decolonizing, or I don't know what or the indigenizing, or what do we call that? Well,
all I want to say is that we should try and put it right. If you're curating an object that is on exhibit, you should tell us where it's from, who made the voice, and all of that. Let's try and so you cannot just tell me this is address for where it been fair, who made it, why was it made, and all of that. So that's the one.
All right. Okay. So thank you so much. I want to thank Vera and Tunde for the opportunity to chair this session. Any last words from Vera? Oh, we are done.
It's muted.
We are muted. Muted. She can't hear.
Oh, that's the classic. So sorry. Thank you so much, Daniel, for chairing this. Many thanks, Tunde, for co-organizing, and many thanks to all speakers of all three panels and to everyone who came for attending and the discussion. Many, many thanks from my side.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.